Order, order. Victoria Collins to move the motion.
Thank you, Sir Desmond Swayne. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Let me start by making something clear. The local people of Harpenden, Berkhamsted, Tring, Redbourne, Sandridge and surrounding villages are no NIMBYs. They are not against housing. They are raising the alarm against top-down national planning that doesn't serve local housing needs, that leaves local services bursting at the seams without adequate investment, or with investment delivered far too late. That fails to deliver the transport infrastructure communities actually need, and that is eroding precious landscapes, some of which are home to rare chalk streams found nowhere else in the world. And I thank some of those who have joined today. Today, the debate is about the impact of planning of transport, the impact of planning on transport infrastructure. To understand that, we need to see the big picture. Harpenden and Berkhamsted, including Tring, Redbourne, Wheatamstead, Sandridge and Margate, are towns and villages steeped in history. Around Tring, Berkhamsted and Aldbury, you'll find the beautiful National Chiltern landscape. 4 rare chalk streams spread throughout the constituency alongside the Grand Union Canal. You'll find settlements that appear in the Domesday Book. Redbourne has the old Watling Street running through the centre. You'll find Berkhamsted Castle, where the English throne was surrendered to William the Conqueror. But you'll also find towns that are originally designed for horse-drawn traffic, now gridlocked with commuter cars. The M1 motorway cuts right through the middle of the constituency, causing further gridlock on country lanes every time there's an accident. Luton Airport, just 7 miles away, is nearly doubling its capacity from 19 million to 32 million passengers a year, adding roughly 1 million additional passengers per month, many travelling on the same routes as local people. On Thameslink and London North Western, rammed trains are cancelled almost daily. Indeed, a group from the Probus Club in Harpenden today arrived after a cancelled train. Bus services have been decimated, and that's before we even talk about the impossibility of finding an NHS dentist, the pressures on GPs, or the desperate need for additional school places, particularly for children with special educational needs. These are old towns and old villages, not built for this scale of growth. So then we must look at the government's approach to planning. Labour has continued the top-down numbers legacy the Conservatives left behind, and in some cases made it significantly worse. From top-down targets to grey belt land, developers are literally having a field day using loopholes to get through unplanned development. This matters. The green light for developers leaves an uncoordinated approach, with infrastructure and communities coming last. The new methodology for calculating housing supply has hit St Albans Council particularly hard. Targets have almost doubled from 855 homes per year to 1,660 homes per year. In Dacorum, numbers have gone from 1,016 homes per year to 1,380. And both of these increased figures will have to be dealt with under further local plans because it's not even the massive housing that we're seeing now. So this has left us facing substantial housing sites, such as the 1,400 homes east of Tring, the Marshcroft development, or 850 homes at South Berkhamsted. In North East Harpenden, over 700 homes are proposed. The proposed Marshcroft development alone would increase Tring by a potential 40%. And as Lucy from Tring says, it makes no sense. Our roads just can't handle it. This is a town that got its market charter over 700 years ago, with the roads to match, and is buttressed against the Chiltern national landscape. And then there's grey belt. I warned the government from the outset that this would hand the advantage to developers, not communities, and that is exactly what has happened. The grey belt's unclear definition creates a wide open door for developers, not communities, and crucially, by focusing protections on towns rather than villages, the guidance leaves villagers, often with fewer services and weaker infrastructure, far more vulnerable to unplanned development. In Berkhamsted, developers have used the grey belt backdoor to push applications adjacent to allocated sites. So Haresfoot Farm, for example, used the grey belt backdoor to get permission on green belt. In Redbourne, the situation is even more alarming. The latest proposal is a 1,000 home development not in the local plan, but claiming grey belt status. Combined with other sites, Redbourne faces a potential pipeline of development that could see it grow by over 70%. As Jen from Redbourne says, I'm hugely concerned there's no local democracy that allows villagers to stop disproportionate housing development. Catherine from Redbourne is equally clear. When it comes to measuring green belt, brown belt and grey belt, villages should not be measured in the same way as towns. This is green belt land with rare chalk streams, waterfalls and flora that you can't find in Europe. It should be protected. And now remember, Redbourne is precisely the kind of village with less infrastructure which has been left more exposed by this grey belt development. So will the Minister speak with colleagues from the Ministry of Housing to address these top-down practices that take powers away from communities and that critical infrastructure? So while Dacorum and St Albans were left without an adopted local plan by the previous Conservative administrations, it's left our area open, ripe for speculative development. Liberal Democrat councils in the area have worked hard to finally get local plans to the examination stage. But while they remain in inspectors' hands, the government gives no protection from unplanned development. Despite continuous calls on the government to help protect us, we've been left exposed. And that is before we even consider the wider pressures bearing down on local councils, which leaves the looming threat of government takeover when too many appeals are overturned. Nor have we covered the lack of teeth for neighbourhood plans or the proposals from the planning legislation to make it easier to build near a train station. With all of these rules, what is important is this puts the power in developers' hands and away from communities, so no wonder developers are popping up all across the constituency. So does the Minister agree that tackling unplanned development and giving communities more power is vital when preparing transport infrastructure? So then we come on to that infrastructure. Underlying all of this is a structural failure in how infrastructure can be planned. This speculative and unplanned development which I've outlined sits entirely outside planned growth modelling. That means these unplanned sites are assessed site by site, in isolation, with no cumulative way of seeing what that means together for roads, buses, rail, cycling, or indeed even the schools, GPs or dentists that communities need. It's wholly inadequate, fragmented and reactive. And local plans cannot account for national infrastructure decisions either. The Luton Airport expansion, the Universal Studios theme park, and even a rail freight development approved by the government has taken the place of thousands of potential homes elsewhere, but they cannot be accounted for. So when councils do secure that investment for infrastructure, we're looking at Section 106 money or the Community Infrastructure Levy. But current viability criteria means that it can often get out of building affordable homes, more affordable homes, or indeed limiting that investment. Yes, I'll happily give it.
Mr. Chairman, can I commend Honourable for bringing this forward? And it seems to me from back home in Northern Ireland where we have similar problems, but listen to Honourable contribution today, that whenever a new development goes up, it's usually private cars. If it's out in the countryside, there's no public transport, so the pressure is always on people to provide their own methods. That puts impact upon the local roads and the local infrastructure, and it seems like private developers are not following the rules. The rules are there should be an impact study done on detailed traffic and transport impact assessment for all major developments. If that's not been done, but the rules seem to indicate that it should, is there not a need then for the councils or for government or local bodies to ensure enforcement action to ensure that the requirements are actually happen rather than sitting back and doing nothing?
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention. So I agree with part of that, but it's also because actually these developers have armies of legal teams. We have also national legislation which is open to interpretation. I'll come on to that later when it comes to roads. And so actually then councils are essentially left powerless when it comes to actually enforcing this legislation because they find the loopholes, they have the money, they have the power to push past. Yes.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way on that point. And she's right to point out that developers do have armies of lawyers. And one of the most frustrating things that local authorities face is when they keep coming back again and again and again. Even when planning authorities reject the application, they'll take it to appeal. And then even if the appeal is rejected, they'll wait a short period of time and then come back again and again. And they only have to win once. And that is incredibly frustrating for the communities that face that threat.
Absolutely. And indeed, so on top of this, when it comes to the power that councils have, councils also warn that when we do get that Section 106 or that Community Infrastructure Levy, that funding is not enough, or that funding available is not enough for the new roads that are needed to develop. And they also warn that if we expect those Section 106 contributions to deliver all new infrastructure, then the burden is often pushed to new homeowners as prices can be pushed up. But what's more, there is no guarantee on delivery of timing of infrastructure plans, often because major infrastructure depends on external bodies or funding cycles such as from highways, regional transport, as well as NHS capital planning cycles or educational funding cycles. But the government must adopt an infrastructure-first approach. So I ask the Minister directly, how will the government empower communities to take a cumulative view of the infrastructure impact that planning has? And what action is the government taking to address the train capacity and services that I've highlighted? So let's get on to those transport services and look at the reality on the ground, starting with roads. Local people put it best. Fiona from Berkhamsted says the roads are completely overwhelmed by traffic through Berkhamsted. Anne says captures the absurdity of national planning guidance, saying the biggest issue for Berkhamsted is a one-size-fits-all NPPF, that national planning framework, for a valley town where the only place left to build is at the top of valley sides and ancient narrow streets that give little scope for cycle routes. It's certainly not a joined-up network. And I can confirm, once as a keen cyclist in Berkhamsted, the difficulty of getting around means that my poor bike is left locked up. But Sarah from Berkhamsted asks, what is the point of building new houses if there's no pavements for people to walk on or safe roads for cars to use? And Jill from Harpenden is direct. The town has so many pinch points on already narrow roads that are already causing jams. These are old towns and villages, many of the roads built, as I said, for horse-drawn traffic. In Berkhamsted, we're a hilly place, and there is no single mention of topography in the national planning framework. And yet the loose definition of severe, in terms of cumulative impact tests for roads and traffic, leaves another door wide open for developers. And if you can get around by road, perhaps you can't get around by road, perhaps you can use the bus. Well, that's a whole other story. Under the Conservatives in Hertfordshire, we saw a 56.5 reduction in bus mileage between 2017 and 2023, the highest cut in England. That has left us with inaccessible areas where you simply need a car to get around. The 307 in Redbourne runs to Harpenden Station only from 9 a.m, with the last departure for 2 p.m, and on Sundays there's no service at all. There is no direct bus connection to local secondary schools. Catherine from Redbourne says it plainly. While you might have to wait about 10 minutes in London for a bus, here we have 3 buses a day to Harpenden. You just can't rely on them. In Berkhamsted, we worked with local campaigners to bring back the 500 every half hour, but those services stop at 7 p.m. In Tring, it's a similar story, and I once tried to get a bus from Wheatamstead to Berkhamsted across my constituency. A 30-minute drive took 4 hours. And the recommended route from Harpenden to Berkhamsted is actually via London, and a journey that costs £35 one way. Hannah, a sixth form student from Harpenden, makes the point well. Public transport allows me as a young person to visit friends and do activities outside the house. It gives me independence. She adds, I've never considered living in Harpenden in the future because it'd be far too expensive to buy a place to live. That is a double failure from this government that needs to be heard. Young people who say they can't afford to stay and can't get around even if they could. So what about the train? In the last 4 weeks, from Harpenden to London, only 7 out of 122 daily train times ran 100% on time. From Berkhamsted to London, only 3 out of 78 daily departures ran 100% on time. From Tring, that's only 3 again. From driver availability to Thameslink core infrastructure failures and a bottleneck around Croydon, things only look to get worse as pressures grow around the Thameslink Bedford to Brighton line. Beyond the housing development is what I've mentioned, are the pressures from Luton Airport, Gatwick Airport expansion and those Universal Studio development. There's a 2-track bottleneck through central London, and when it fails, the whole line fails. So GTR has asked the government for funding for a backup system, so I'd like to ask the Minister, has that been agreed? And what are the government doing to work with rail operators to prepare for the pressures building up on that Bedford to Brighton Thameslink line? Yes.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way. Like her, in my area of Surrey Heath, we have all kinds of speculative developments coming forward right now, but I think one of the greatest challenges we face is the potential relocation of Frimley Park Hospital. And when I asked about the budget that had been set aside for the creation of new roads, railway stations, road improvements, road widening schemes, I was told that there was no money set aside and that any costs might come notionally from a contingency fund that was set aside. Does the Honourable Lady agree with me that that is no way to use a contingency fund? And if government bodies can't get this right, what hope should we have for private developers?
And this, I mean, quite frankly, I find this shameful. There is no wonder that communities are pushing back on development if they see that that infrastructure isn't there, they can't get around, they can't get a GP appointment, and then they see thousands of new homes being built. No wonder the public trust is lost. And so today I could not cover every application across Harpenden and Berkhamsted, but this story is repeated across our corner of Hertfordshire, and indeed up and down the country. And I thank the thousands of constituents who have contacted me. Thousands have written to me about their concerns, and 94 alone with comments for today, and several, as I said, have joined me. But here's the nugget of it. If I could say, hand on heart, that in 10 years' time, this top-down planning would truly deliver affordable, sustainable housing, houses that local teenagers like Hannah could afford, if I could look her in the eyes and tell her she's wrong about not being able to afford a home, if I could say that the infrastructure would be built, that developers wouldn't squeeze out of their commitments, that trains and buses would be able to catch up, to be up to scratch, I'd be making very different arguments today, but I can't.
The latest NPPF makes it very clear that transport planning and infrastructure should be designed in at the outset. But in my rural constituency of Chippenham, we have seen continuous large-scale developments on the outside of towns where it takes 25 minutes to walk into a town centre. There are no buses. So it's not like London where you wait 5 minutes and a bus turns up. You can wait 2 hours and nothing turns up. So would the Honourable Member agree with me that the National Planning Framework needs to set aside funding as well as a commitment to trying to make sure that transport is put in at the outset?
Absolutely, I would agree with that completely. And coming back to that promise I would like to make to Hannah, but I can't. Given that the average house price in Berkhamsted is over 650,000 and in Harpenden is over 900,000, and given that the median new build price across the constituency since last year was 747,500, so-called affordable homes in expensive postcodes like ours, priced at 80% of market value, mean that an average house still costs over $500,000. How on earth can we say to local people that they're sacrificing Greenbelt so that their children or grandchildren can afford to buy? Local people know that this is not the truth, and that is why they're pushing back. Local people understand the need for housing, but what they cannot understand is how powers are being taken away from them, how top-down targets are pushing expensive homes onto communities that need genuinely affordable housing, how precious landscapes are being sacrificed, and that Labour have not learnt the lessons from the last government. Communities will again be left without the transport infrastructure they need, and local people will be forced to move away. So I call on the Minister and the Government to hear our calls for infrastructure first, community-led development. It's the least that our communities deserve. Thank you.
Can I ask members who wish to be called to stand in their places? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Can I suggest 4 minutes to start with? The question is that this House has considered the impact of planning developments on local transport. Amanda Hack.
Thank you, Sir Desmond. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I thank the Honourable Member for Harpenden and Beckhamsted for giving me the opportunity to talk about one of my favourite topics, that's public transport, or lack thereof. As other rural MPs in the rooms will know, improving local transport links are a never-ending discussion for us, particularly in a constituency like North West Leicestershire that only has a bus service to rely on, as we have no passenger rail at all, so everybody needs to travel by road. Off the back of 14 years of austerity forced upon us by the coalition and the previous Conservative government, the thing we have to consider within this context, though, is our community has been growing throughout that time, alongside the destruction of our public services, library, shore stops and day services, but our public transport was cut by 62% too. Planning developments and local transport are also about understanding the population you have, as well as that population for the future. And when we talk about planning, we have to consider the impact, particularly in my constituency, of huge shed expansion in the industrial sector. When I speak to local residents in Heather regularly, a village within North West Leicestershire, they're just a stone's throw away from Ibstock, which is a developing town. Many have told me when they first moved to Heather, they didn't need to use public transport regularly, but knowing they could get a bus meant they had a service they could rely on. Now, as they're getting older, their needs have changed, but the public transport in Heather has long gone. Demand is fluctuating, but we're not evaluating that quick enough or planning for the long term, so that when a demography of a town or a state changes, we're reliant on the community fighting for themselves to get services in place rather than bus services reflecting the needs of that changing community. So when we talk about connecting new housing developments to leisure, jobs, education, medical and so much more, the context is that we have so many fewer services we did 15 years ago. So that context is important in these transport conversations. And planning for change, planning for growth is the very core of what we're discussing today. In fact, when planning a new housing estate, it feels so much more straightforward when considering the numbers you need to, say, to create a new school or a doctor's surgery. Might not be easy, but we understand the maths that sits behind it. However, when it comes to public transport, it's much less cohesive. It seems a complete waste then the public transport is lagging behind a much more piecemeal discussion. We're not planning for change, we're responding to it, and that is very frustrating for our local communities. We had a newish community development in my community that already had an enhancement of a new school and the opportunity to extend the doctor's surgery. As part of the planning conditions, residents were given a 6-month bus pass, but it's of little use. There are no buses. What is the point? What we're not getting is that true connection between what our new developments need and how to seamlessly connect new housing development to our towns. Our towns need those new communities to survive and thrive. Any building on existing town centre doesn't create that good connectivity, that extra footfall actually means that they have an impairment on growth. Quite often the bus network doesn't serve newer estates that sit just outside our town centres, which means those residents are just cut off from the town centre. The town centre is cut off from them. They simply just never visit. Therefore, the opportunity to help our town centre is lost. I was proud to sit on the Bus Services Bill Committee, and one thing that's clear from this government is the commitment to get more money into local authorities for public transport. However, the difficult part is trying to ensure the money is actually being utilised to the best of its ability, as we're not planning for that change, we're reacting to it. To conclude, Chair, there needs to be a better link between where people live and where the requirement of services actually are. We're never going to be able to plan for everything, but I'd like to hear from the Minister of their view of how bus services in the long term can be a vehicle for growth and create clearer community connections.
Rebecca Paul.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Sir Desmond. I am extremely grateful to the Honourable Member for Harpington and Berkhamsted for securing this really important debate. In my experience, nothing erodes public confidence in the planning system faster than development that is delivered with the promise of appropriate infrastructure that never materialises. People, I find, are often accepting and understanding of new homes being built, if done in a thoughtful and considered way. What they are not willing to accept is development pushing local residents out of the catchment for schools, it becoming impossible for them to see their GP, their homes starting to flood regularly, and no longer being able to get a seat on the train on the way to work. In my constituency, we are facing huge amounts of development with an absolutely ridiculous doubling of housing targets, all whilst London's target comes down. And unfortunately, I see no signs of adequate investment into our local public transport to accompany this ludicrous target. As honourable members will be aware, the government's draft revised national planning policy framework is heavily tilted towards encouraging development around stations. I understand the logic to this. If you want to reduce car dependency and create opportunity, you build near public transport. To maximise the use of existing infrastructure, you build in those more urban areas already well connected. If you want to protect high-quality greenbelt, you densify close to existing settlements. These are sensible propositions, but the NPPF, as written, is currently too broad brush and doesn't discern between those bits of land close to stations that fit with these objectives and those which don't. Take, by way of example, Kingswood Station in my constituency. There is much land nearby that is high-quality greenbelt. Yet the train service is far from ideal, there is no timetabled bus service, and there are plentiful other brownfield sites, and indeed greenfield sites, that would be much better to build on first. Again, I recognise the good intentions behind this change, and indeed support looking at land close to train stations first, but additional parameters are required to act as an appropriate filter and protect villages like Kingswood. If the planning system is going to prioritise developments near stations above all other considerations, it must also be accompanied by extra investment and funding in transport capacity. If the infrastructure is not there or not credibly planned, the answer should be no. This approach would enable growth at genuinely suitable hubs while protecting small villages. Coming on to Gatwick expansion, I am concerned that it has been given the green light to operate a second runway without sufficient thought being given to what this means for surrounding public transport. Reigate Station sits on a busy commuter artery, yet the Department for Transport has said nothing about what impact millions of extra passengers heading down to Gatwick will have on this line and station. The most transformational improvement for Reigate Station would be the extension of its platform to allow additional and more efficient services. A network rail scheme was proposed back in 2020 to create a 12-car turn-back platform to allow Thameslink trains to stop at the station and avoid the need for splitting and joining of trains at Redhill. I would ask the government to reconsider this project in light of Gatwick expansion. And Redhill is impacted too. I would be grateful if the Minister could clarify what plans are in place for these stations and lines to meet the need for additional capacity and more frequent and reliable services. I would also suggest that it is a good opportunity to ensure the facilities at these stations are fit for the 21st century and fully accessible so everyone can use them. On the topic of accessibility, I would like to raise the plight of Earlswood Station. This is a station that serves a growing area and one that could come under even greater pressure if the planning system encourages heavier development around it. Yet Earlswood infrastructure is already creaking. Things have got so bad that the underpass was recently badly flooded and had to be pumped out. People are literally taking their shoes and socks off to get the train. Those with buggies, older residents and disabled passengers are effectively blocked from travelling with this situation. I am pleased to see that Network Rail have now replaced the pumps to help address the situation, but there is still more to do to address it in the long run. In closing, if the government wants public support for housing growth, then it must improve supporting public transport as well. These two things must go hand in hand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Desmond. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I thank the Honourable Member as well for Harpenden and Berkhamsted for organising today's debate, which really brings together so many of us who have a shared passion for local transport where it aligns with developments. Now, I can understand why so many colleagues have come here today to raise concerns about future developments and how they see those new properties affecting and adding pressure to local transport. But I want to join my colleague from Leicestershire here in talking about the fact that for many rural communities, we're already missing the vital transport links for our existing residents. In Shropshire, we lost over 65% of our local buses under the last government. That's 2 out of every 3 buses were deleted. Can you imagine what that does to the largest inland county in this country? We now have communities that are isolated, residents that are lonely, and vital services such as health, shops and community just out of reach for so many. One of my biggest challenges since becoming the MP for Shrewsbury, like many others in this room, is how to help local transport partners work together to build back our transport infrastructure. And so I'd like to bring to the Minister's attention the opportunity that also comes with new housing developments, not just the opportunity to secure the funding and the plans for more buses, trains, bus stops and networks, but that the opposite is also true. And a couple of colleagues today have mentioned the change to the planning infrastructure. But if we think about this for a minute, when we consider strategic housing developments in our local plans, we need to reconsider the opportunities for housing and development that could be maximised close to existing transport infrastructure. The Rail Industry Association produced an influential report on this last October called Station Investment Zones, a new model for investment in transport, housing and growth. The argument from the industry being that well-connected stations already offer the economic opportunity as engines of growth, and that transport or local government landowners could unlock sites near stations, trams, buses, transport hubs to offer hyper-connected housing as infill. There's another benefit from this approach, and I've heard ministers also mention this. By investing in our station quarters, we can lift what can sometimes become a bit of a forgotten corner of our town, and we can turn it into a more brightly lit, well-used area with bustling footfall, more amenities, more bustle. Let's bring people back to the community hubs that they should always have been. Of course, this delivers more passengers for rail operators such as GBR and reduces unnecessary car journeys, helping that modal shift we're all trying to drive forward to reduce congestion and pollution in town centres like Shrewsbury. I'd love to see this type of development near my train station in Shrewsbury. Let's get more shops and cafes and streetlights and ATMs and footfall to complement the services that are already offered there. So I was delighted to see this government amend that planning policy in the NPPF to include the presumption in favour for suitable developments within 800 metres of a well-connected station. It's the ultimate example of joined-up government with cross-departmental policy that delivers much-needed housing where we already have transport infrastructure, which in turn helps to fund more transport for those areas that you're talking about today, where housing will need to be increased for more. So on behalf of the people of Shrewsbury, can I say to the Minister, thank you very much for bringing forward a very sensible and impactful policy that will help all of us in the search for transport with housing.
Thanks, Desmond. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I'd like to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Harpenden and Berkhamsted, for securing this important debate and for her continued work in this area. In West Dorset, the issue with planning development is not just how many homes we build, but where we build them, whether they are built with the infrastructure that is needed to support them. As I have said repeatedly, we need the right houses in the right places at the right price. That means genuinely affordable homes for local people. It means accessible homes, so older residents can downsize and stay close to the family. It means not building on floodplains, something that recent storms in the area have shown to be serious and costly. It means protecting natural landscapes, like the one that covers 70% of West Dorset. And it means that when new homes are approved, the infrastructure that is needed, like GPs, dentists, schools and critically transport, must be delivered. Having spent many thrilling hours on the Railway Committee alongside my friend, the member for Didcot and Wantage, and in fact the Shadow Minister here today, I will not revisit every rail argument, but I do want to be clear that housing growth and rail capacity must be planned together. Local transport must be properly joined up, and local communities must be given a voice. Buses need to connect reliably with train services so that people in new developments can realistically commute without relying entirely on a car. When demand increases, supply should increase with it. Ticket prices remain too high and peak time services are often overcrowded, with elderly and disabled passengers standing for long journeys. It's not acceptable, and it will only worsen if housing numbers rise without matched investment. West Dorset is rural and spread out. We have an ageing population. Many residents rely on buses to get to work, school, hospital appointments and shops. Yet bus services have been cut back dramatically. From 2010, service frequency in West Dorset fell by 62%. Satisfaction with bus services across Dorset stands at just 48%, despite nearly half of residents living in areas ranked in the top 20% most deprived nationally for access to services. Dorset received £3.8 million through the Bus Services Improvement Plan, compared with £11.6 million for Devon. It was one of the lowest settlements in the South West. It does not reflect our rural geography, the scale of the problem, our older population, or our surge in visitor numbers during the summer months. When new housing developments are approved, especially in rural areas, they should come with guaranteed improvements to local transport. If buses are unreliable or non-existent, people will have no choice but to drive. Properly supported community transport also has a role to play. In places where commercial routes are no longer viable, there should be secure grant fundings for community-led services. A hub-and-spoke model linking villages to key towns can be more realistic than trying to restore full commercial routes. The CB3 service in Bemister shows what can be achieved when communities work together. But parish and local councils cannot be expected to carry the financial burden alone. We should also look seriously at pilots for larger rollouts of on-demand services. Flexible bus systems can use technology to plan the most efficient routes based on bookings. These services have already worked particularly well for younger people travelling between villages. If it is to work, the council will need technical support and funding to deliver it properly. On-demand services should be supported where reinstating traditional bus services are not viable, and the government should provide new centralised pots of community transport funding, which can be bid for specifically to counteract the years of underfunding. The extra money and multi-year funding from central government is a welcome change, but it's not enough to turn the tide. We need targeted measures to those places who have lost the most before we can start building a more sustainable network. Otherwise, we will just normalise failure. There is also a sequencing problem in planning. I've seen developments where housing has gone ahead, but infrastructure has stalled, sometimes because a contractor, as in the case recently in Bridport, has gone bust after being awarded the contract. That leaves new homes without the transport links, the roads, the roundabouts that they were promised. It undermines trust in the planning system and fuels opposition to future development. transport is central to whether a development works. If we build homes without proper improving buses, trains and roads, we increase congestion and make daily life harder and create understandable resentment. If we want communities to have new and agree to new housing developments, we must show that infrastructure will come with it, not years later.
Chris Bloor.
I didn't stand up to speak.
All right, very good.
I was planning on an intervention, but I will just make a couple of points.
Julie Buckley.
No, Julie's already spoken, but I'll just make a quick comment, Mr. Swain.
Very good. Quickly then.
In case I don't get the opportunity to intervene, but I really recognise the points made by the mover of the motion, the debate, and I come from the generation that has really struggled to buy a home in the community that they're from. And many of my colleagues and friends who've done incredibly well in their lives, they've achieved, they're still living with their mums and dads. And that's something that just can't continue. So whilst I recognise her concerns about development and her concerns about transport not following, the situation that we have right now is simply not sustainable. And we have to be brave, both as politicians and as local representatives, to make sure that we don't make good the enemy of perfect. We have to push this forward for our young people because they've had the same promises for 20 years that we'll build those affordable houses, that will make those developments connected to their communities. And I'm afraid what I see, and I say this as someone who's opposed and supported developments in my constituency, and I take her point that we'll never meet the needs on our waiting lists unless we build affordable homes. But we actually do have to start putting spades in the ground at some stage. And as representatives in this Parliament, we can't continue for another decade to see the low housing numbers built in communities like mine in Redditch that put at risk the life chances of my residents, but also means that my friends have to move to nearby conurbations instead of being able to raise families and live in the constituencies that they want to. So I agree with many of the things that she said, but I also think we do have to be brave as politicians moving forward.
Thank you, Sir Desmond. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd like to thank the member for Harpenden and Berkhamsted for tabling this debate today. On paper, Mid-Leicestershire is well connected between the M1 and the A46, but in reality, for my constituents, it's a very different story. I'm not coming from this as an NIMBY. I do not oppose development for the sake of it. I recognise the pressing need for housing, particularly for young people to get on that property ladder, and, of course, for growth. However, what I cannot accept is endless development without the infrastructure to sustain it. Homes without roads, rail links and other public transport make the lives of my constituents poorer. So while the map may suggest connectivity, the daily experience of my constituents tells a different story. In Markfield, for example, residents regularly contact me about the Fieldhead roundabout. Many residents face delays of more than an hour, travelling just a few miles to get to work, hospital appointments or simply take their children to school. All of this is happening while further development is being granted, and there appears to be next to no consideration of the long-term and cumulative impact of developments on connectivity. In Stanton-under-Barden, residents have effectively been cut off from Colville and the surrounding villages since last September. Their sole bus service has been cancelled as a direct result of disruption caused by a large development at the entrance to the village. While Leicestershire County Council claimed that alternatives are available to residents, my casework suggests otherwise. And in Ratby, there's a prolonged closure of roads, again as a result of developments, which has even disrupted the regular delivery of People's Post. So, Sir Desmond, the question is, what can we do to help residents with the ongoing challenges posed by continued development, but ensure that we have places for the next generation to live? Firstly, I believe there must be fundamental re-evaluation of how Section 106 monies are being spent, or spent as originally intended. We are told consistently that these contributions from developers to local authorities exist to mitigate the impact of new developments on existing residents, to fund roads, schools, transport links and community infrastructure. But does this actually materialise? In 2024, it was reported that councils are sitting on more than £6 billion of unspent Section 106 monies. This £6 billion that was intended to ease the pressure on communities to improve junctions, support bus services and enhance local amenities. Instead, it lies dormant, or worse still, is returned to developers. Secondly, I'll give way.
thank the Honourable Member for giving way. As a neighbouring constituency MP, one of the things that has always been a huge frustration is Leicestershire is actually in the top 10 of held on to 106. So I think there definitely needs to be this conversation about how do we get that 106 money spent and spent quickly.
I thank the Honourable Lady for intervention, and we both served on Leicestershire County Council together, so I am well aware, we both are well aware of that issue, and I know we've made that case before and we will continue to do so to ensure that money is invested in local infrastructure. Secondly, as I've seen in Mid-Leicestershire, the consequences of being a constituency that straddles multiple local planning authorities. We have decisions made on the edge of one authority that impacts the residents that lay on the other side of the other authority. Now, I tabled 2 amendments to the Planning and Infrastructure Bill that was aimed at addressing this issue. Sadly, the government didn't choose to adopt those amendments, so I would ask the Minister to really look at that to ensure that where there are multiple planning authorities straddling different areas, that really is taken into consideration when planning permission is granted. But finally, we should not support the Whitehall assumption that all roads must lead to London. We need to link big cities in the north, in the Midlands, east and west. This is how we will truly level up. So Desmond, most of us in this House recognise that we do need development, homes and growth, but development without infrastructure is not progress, it's a burden. We need better connectivity in our local areas, the infrastructure for which goes hand in hand with planning reforms. So I urge the Government to take on board the many constructive suggestions from today's debate so that we have a system that truly recognises the need for infrastructure before and alongside development.
Into making some side comments before getting into the meat of my speech, just relating to this point about aggregate supply and meeting the housing needs of young people. I think it's really important that we bring some facts to that debate, because the reality is that our housing stock in this country expanded more rapidly from 2013 to 2023 than our population did. It is not an issue of aggregate supply, and focusing on that will never meet the needs of younger people in this country. But the relationship between new housing and local transport cuts to the core of why we need to end the developer-led, profit-motivated approach to planning in this nation. Despite warm words in national guidelines, right across the country, the relentless reality of most new estates is more traffic, more toxic air pollution, and more space given to car parking than space for children to play. Inadequate public transport, distant services, non-existent local employment opportunities, and more noise, congestion and pollution blighting our lives. Few things shape the basic day-to-day experience of life in the UK in 2026 more than the disconnect between transport policy on paper and actual development around our towns and villages. When we came to power, Labour promised change, but this experience will not begin to improve until we address one of the most harmful sentences in national planning policy, the presumption in favour of sustainable development. There are few policies, Chair, more baleful or more egregiously misnamed. It may be called sustainable development, but in fact it does exactly the reverse of what it says on the tin. This legacy policy puts power overwhelmingly in the hands of developers, overruling the aspirations of local councils and trampling on the concerns of communities. It is responsible for the proliferation of bolt-on estates on the edge of towns and villages, with no realistic prospects that most people living there will be able to access the services and facilities we all need in our daily lives, other than by driving, locking in car dependency from the get-go. It allows the construction of developments designed to exist as commuter dormitories, rather than creating real communities with work, leisure and culture all within walking distance, the precise opposite of the idealism of the Garden City principles originally put into action in Letchworth. By clearing the way for speculative, unsustainable developments, the presumption currently ensures that much of what is built in this country is defined by what is easy and profitable for developers, rather than what is good for people and planet. Above all, card-dependent developments like these squeeze the space for genuine society. Community connections will always struggle to thrive if the public realm is dominated by parked cars and traffic. We need to put local authorities back in the driving seat with the powers to design and deliver developments that genuinely deliver affordable homes in well-planned and cohesive communities with all of the opportunities necessary for happy and fulfilling lives. Above all, Chair, to ensure development comes with healthy and positive local transport connections, we must, as my Select Committee, the Environmental Audit Committee, called for, amend the definition of presumption in favour of sustainable development in the National Planning Policy Framework to strengthen the safeguards against environmentally unsustainable, unplanned and speculative development.
Desmond, it's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair, and I would like to thank my colleague, the Honourable Member for Harpenden and Berkhamsted, for her very insightful opening speech. If you double the number of homes in an area, but you don't double the roads, the buses, the rail capacity, or indeed the flood protection and the sewage, something has to give. In Siddington, in my constituency of the South Cotswolds, we're being asked to absorb up to 1,100 additional homes on top of the 2,500 already underway nearby, with no credible guaranteed transport plan to support them. That isn't infrastructure-led growth, it's infrastructure playing catch-up, and rural communities are the ones that will pay the price. In a previous career, I was a management consultant, and we learned about critical path planning, that certain things need to happen in a certain order for them to work smoothly. And that just doesn't seem to be happening at the moment. In a perfect world, I know we don't live in one, but we would have had the land use framework come out first so that we see how we allocate our land. I understand that if you add together all of the land area commitments in this country, we need a couple more Walesers to accommodate it all. So clearly something has gone a little awry. To pick up on the point already made by a couple of colleagues, will housing targets actually deliver the affordable houses that we need where we need them? I am not at all convinced on that. As an environmentalist, I'm very concerned about the measures in the Planning and Infrastructure Bill. Are we in real risk of trashing our countryside, building houses that are not fit for their designated purpose? And of course, we don't yet have the sewerage infrastructure. As a constituency that lies largely in the Thames water catchment, this is very much top of my mind. I will give way.
On that point, would she agree with me that actually, when we look at statutory consultees, the utility sector should be a statutory consultee? In a previous life, I did work for a utility company. One of the frustrations of that company was they were often asked to put in infrastructure to support massive housing developments, but there is no requirement to be consulted as part of the planning process. Does she agree with me that is wrong?
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his intervention, and I believe that we do need to challenge the automatic right for developers to connect to the sewerage network, that in fact they need to be encouraged to work with the public utilities to ensure that the capacity is there before they put spades in the ground. I realise I am slightly digressing from the key issue here, which is about transport, and I will come to that now. Siddington's road network consists of narrow rural lanes that were never designed for high traffic volumes. It already exists high congestion at peak times, especially around Ashton Road, and the routes feeding the A419 and A429 corridors. Another 1,000 homes, more or less, could potentially mean another 1,500, maybe even 2,000 additional vehicles, with a significant increase in daily car movement. So if you think that the potholes are bad now, they are only going to get worse, not to mention the carbon emissions and the air quality. Instead, we should be encouraging public transport and active travel and designing these new developments accordingly. I've heard recently from town councils in Cricklade and Fairford their concerns about these large new bolt-on estates that are just a little bit too far away from the facilities of the town centre. People will have to drive, adding to the existing congestion and pressure on parking spaces. Rural bus services are already limited in frequency and coverage. On the 51 route, the loss of the 8 a.m. service and the 4 p.m. return means that people, it's just not a viable way to get to work and back. The result is being locked into increased car use. A young constituent of mine, Heather Kent, is attending stage door learning in Cheltenham, but she now faces an 11-hour day with long waits between services or depend on her parents collecting her. She first came to my attention as someone who regularly does litter picks in the area. She will be spending more time trying to get to and from places and less time picking up litter. Meanwhile, the 77 bus route from Fairford to Cirencester, there have been service changes and serious reliability concerns. Once somebody gives up on reliable public transport and they buy a car, we have then lost them. They will then use their car to get everywhere with all of the consequences of that. So what we need is not just short-term promises of viable public transport. We need this to be locked in for the long term, not just development on developer payments, so that people can plan their lives accordingly. Excuse me a moment. Going forwards, as has already been mentioned, the impacts are not just linear, they are exponential. So we do need careful, sensible modelling of what the impact of these new developments will be and the resulting total vehicle movement. I want to emphasise I am not opposed to housing. Clearly, we do need more affordable housing, and I do echo the points of the honourable member to my left about not having just developer-led housing for profit, but having the right kinds of housing in the right places with an inbuilt sense of community. Without this careful planning, we will face permanent congestion, reduced safety, worsened flooding, loss of village identity, and potential serious adverse impacts on nature and on well-being. Planning should shape the future. It should not erode the present. If we allow large-scale developments to proceed without guaranteed transport infrastructure, we're not building thriving communities. We're building instead daily frustration, longer commutes, gridlocked lanes, and increased flood risk. Growth done well creates opportunity. Growth done badly creates regret and resentment. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Desmond. The Westminster Rail line runs from Exeter to London Waterloo via Fennerton, Honiton and Axminster. Network Rail describes the line from Exeter to Basingstoke as, quote, one of the worst performing single track sections nationally. It is one of the most underinvested lines in England. It's a cliche in this place to talk about a Cinderella service, but trains serving residents on the West of England line do indeed provide a Cinderella service. In fact, people stood waiting for a South West Railway carriage to travel from Fennerton, Honiton or Axminster may wonder if they are waiting for a pumpkin. According to the Salisbury to Exeter Rail User Group, the line has examples of everything the Secretary of State for Transport says is wrong with rail in this country. For example, the section between Salisbury and Yeovil Junction has, it operates at an 88% capacity, well in excess of the 80% threshold needed for resilience. The Under-Secretary of State for Local Transport stated in May last year that there were no plans to enhance the West of England line, yet it is apparent to anyone who travels on it that there is a dire need for improvement. Between August and November last year, the service ground to a painful, slow pace during dry weather because of so-called soil moisture deficit. During this period, the entire line was served by just one train every 2 hours, and when journeys were cancelled, passengers were left waiting for upwards of 4 hours for trains. This situation is particularly concerning in the light of proposed new housing development in Devon. Exeter is the fastest growing city in England by population. Over 1,100 houses are to be built across East Devon in each of the next 5 years, as demanded by the housing targets imposed on local authorities by the government in Westminster. And in the 2030s, a new town is projected to be built called Malcolm, which would have 10,000 houses over the long term. Last November, the Housing Secretary announced that proposed development within 15 minutes of railway stations could be given a default yes in the interest of promoting house building in so-called travel-to-work areas. Changes to the National Planning Policy Framework are currently subject to consultation. They lack restrictive criteria for those railway stations that are deemed to be not to be well connected. So those railway stations that are not well connected could potentially open up development in any village or town that has a railway station, apparently without restriction. New housing developments surely cannot be justified in this way when the rail infrastructure is substandard, and it's raising significant concerns for residents of communities I represent like Fennerton, Honiton, Axminster and Columpton. But thankfully, a vision for the line has been laid out by the Salisbury to Exeter Rail User Group, with 6 points agreed by key stakeholders, including South Western Railway, Network Rail, GWR and Devon County Council. This plan includes new rolling stock and power sources, signalling and the delivering of double track, but at the very least, a passing loop at Wimpole and a passing loop at Tisbury. It is the funding that is missing. The Rail Minister stated on the Green Signals podcast that connectivity drives growth, jobs and homes, and he is right. But without investment and improvement, the West of England line will not have that connectivity. And in the absence of that investment, it cannot be the basis on which new housing is justified. The message from people I represent is plain. Infrastructure first, please. Thank you.
Mayor Gill.
Thank you, Sir Desmond. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and may I also thank my honourable friend, the member for Harpenden and Berkhamsted, for securing this debate. And I've listened with great interest to many of the debates and speeches given today, including from my near neighbours, which have been very interesting to kind of hear a run through their constituencies. And if I may take you a bit of a run through some of the issues in my constituency as well. Many members have spoken to the issues of bolt-on developments, so-called ribbon development, where we get these additional speculative developments extending villages and towns beyond their infrastructure capacity. And that is true for a village in my constituency called Charlegrove, which is at risk of becoming one of the longest villages in the country. It's beginning to look, if you look at it on a map, and the developers get their way, it will look a bit more like Chile eventually, as developers seek to take advantage of the B480 without delivering any infrastructure alongside it. And I have fought as a councillor against developments that sought to do so. But also I want to speak to planned development and badly planned development in particular. And no more is that true also in Charlegrove, which has an airfield that was sold from the MOD back in, I think it was 2001, to Homes England. But this village, Charlegrove, is in the middle of nowhere, and I do it no disservice by saying so. It is a lovely village in a rural setting. It has no mass transit system. There is no railway. There is very limited bus service. It is a car-dependent community, and there's no getting away from that. That is purely geography. It is where it is. And yet it has been assigned 3,500 new homes in the local plan that was forced through by the former Conservative government, and indeed a member who no longer sits on the Conservative benches but sits amongst the Reform UK benches. Now, residents are wholly opposed to this, as am I, because it requires massive road building to facilitate it. It requires bypasses at the villages of Chiselhampton and Stadhampton, but also Cuxham, even though Homes England are trying to row back from it. And also we will get bottlenecks at Little Milton as well, as residents try to move from this car-dependent dormitory town to the M40 and onwards to London, Oxford or beyond for work. Now, we need to move beyond car-dependent communities for reasons that many have outlined, including honourable members on these benches. But elsewhere in my constituency, bypasses are still required to facilitate developments, so-called edge roads. And I have been supportive of the Watlington Relief Road. And this is an example of a community that has embraced development. It actively sought development, new homes that it otherwise didn't have to take within the local plan. It put them into its neighbourhood plan so that it could get a relief road because of its historic nature of the town means it has a choke point that was previously only used by horse and cart and is now used as the main through route to the M40 through Watlington. And it has been incredibly frustrating to see homes being built ahead of the relief road, to the point where we're now seeing intense difficulties navigating the town. And so even where we have communities that are embracing development, and that we're betraying them by not delivering the infrastructure alongside it. So what I want to see is more investment in infrastructure alongside those communities that get new developments.
Liberal Democrat front bench.
Thank you, Sir Desmond. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship again. I congratulate my honourable friend on securing such an important debate today. She's made a number of really salient points that I wholeheartedly agree with, in particular what she said about the impact of losing local voices in the planning process. As Liberal Democrats, we believe the government should be doing things with people, not to them. Their planning reforms are another example of where we could gain the confidence of far more in planning decisions if they were able to be properly involved and consulted. Now, I was also pleased to hear the excellent speeches of my honourable friends from Mid-Dorset talking about housing growth pressure, the South Cotswolds reminding us of the importance of doing the right things in the right order, my honourable friends from Honiton and Sidmouth on the importance of money, and my honourable friend from Henley and Thames on getting the balance right between different types of transport. So, Desmond, most reasonable people would think that decisions about transport and planning should go hand in hand. Planning decisions lead to transport requirements, and transport provision will inform planning decisions. However, like so much of the creaking and archaic machinery of the state, the predetermined silos for these two areas sit separately and often work in conflict rather than in harmony. What people want is for decisions to be made with a focus on them. How do we best plan infrastructure and transport to support people? Even within transport, there are silos within silos. How the different modes of transport and transport integration are not considered together well, despite how interconnected they are in reality. These levels of bureaucracy and failure are not what people want when it comes to delivering a working transport system to them. They just want decisions to be made that help get them where they want to go, when they want to go, and if that's really beyond the abilities of the state, then we should all despair. Talking about alterations to the machinery of government might sound like wonkery, but in cases like these, it's clear to see where making the state work better would make our constituents' lives better too. Rarely am I desperate to give credit to the planning system, but it does succeed in taking a more holistic view of transport into consideration when making decisions. It can assess the needs and uses of a wide range of transport modes. It understands the interplay between housing and employment and transport, and it thinks about where people are going and when, and what steps might need to be necessary to improve their experiences. But it has little real power to actually make any changes. The closest the planning system can get is by creating a sizable enough amount of housing demand and hoping that the transport decision makers notice and deliver the necessary improvements. This means that so many people end up in disconnected new estates or working in employment areas without any real accessibility other than by private car. There is a fundamental lack of overarching strategy for too many of these decisions, which would make the experience of people living in newly built areas and those seeing change in the ones they already live in immensely better. For Norfolk, I've believed that a key way for us to secure that strategy was through devolution, which I've been trying to deliver since my first county council campaign kicked off nearly a decade ago. Devolving transport powers to local areas means that decisions on wide-ranging strategy and aims can be made with people closer to the people they impact, with real local buy-in. The promise of seeing those powers in Norfolk made me feel we might finally crack the rural transport problems that have held our area back for too long. But we've seen a double whammy of letdowns on this front in recent months. Firstly, the Labour government pushed our mayoral election down the line to 2028, meaning more years without the power to deliver the change that my residents need now. And in the last week, we've seen the Conservative leader of Norfolk County Council launch into a titanic tantrum over local elections and refuse to work with the government on any further devolution discussions. Because she felt jilted by the government, she's abandoned the opportunity for progress and for money to pursue a personal vendetta against the Secretary of State, calling him things that I frankly can't repeat in this chamber, Sir Desmond. I've got my strong disagreements with the devolution process, but I want to put Norfolk first, not the ego of someone who's supposed to be a local leader. She tried to throw Norfolk under the bus, but without any transport powers, it's unlikely one would show up. Back to the matter in hand, Sir Desmond. There are improvements we Liberal Democrats want to deliver and could deliver at local and national levels. We want to see more buses with more people on them, and these need to work out alongside the planning of new developments. For the young students and workers, we have proposed a bus fare discount enabling easier access to work and education or just getting to socialise with friends. We want to expand walking and cycling access with a boost to budgets and a drive to create more active travel routes that get people out of cars and onto paths where possible. And on our railways, we want to make the commuter experience better, back passengers with a new passengers charter and give people the confidence to move their journeys onto public transport. Now that the local elections are back in Norfolk, I'm sure many of my Liberal Democrat colleagues will find themselves at some point over the next few weeks lost inside a rabbit warren estate with a dodgy phone signal and a bunch of undelivered leaflets, asking themselves a key question. Was this place designed for people to live or for cars to drive? We have to make transport and planning work more cohesively because it delivers tangible benefits to our constituents' lives and could do so quickly. The government can do and must do more. The need to restore faith in the planning system and our transport system, and all our residents will reap the benefits.
Mayhew, Shadow Minister.
Thank you very much, Sir Desmond, and thank you again for agreeing to chair this interesting debate. I also thank the Honourable Member for Harpenden and Berkhamsted for putting it on and working to have this debate today. Now, any Member of Parliament with a pulse who's served more than a day here will realise how interconnected the relationship is between planning decisions, housing developments in their constituencies, and the provision of local infrastructure to support it. And one of the biggest complaints that I bet every single one of us will have received over the course of our period in office has been, we're not against planning, but we need the infrastructure in first and then the development in later, because we need to look after not just the coming population, but the existing population as well. That is right at the heart of so much of our local democratic representation, trying to balance the needs between the future population and the existing population. Gladly.
Foundation cost anywhere in England, and they're trying to address that pressure by building new housing, but the challenge is that one, the developments in my constituency, after residents moved into their homes, they then waited nearly a decade for a bus route to get in and a new school to be built as well, and also train services are under pressure as well. So does my friend agree with me that whilst housing is essential, you know, as is some development, it really must reflect the community needs in the capacity of the local transport services?
Well, I'm grateful for the intervention. To look up the frequency of services from Berkhamsted to London, because the Honourable Member in her main speech said that so many of them weren't on time. I would gently point out to her that with services every 10 minutes, there would be people in my constituency who would give their eye teeth for that level of connectivity. You only have to wait a couple more minutes, you've got another one, and then another one after that. So whilst I don't diminish the fundamental argument that she makes, which is that transport infrastructure, which is actually the title of this debate, but we've quite rightly, in my view, Sir Desmond, you've been very generous. We have stretched it a little bit to other local infrastructure as well. That is crucially important, that if we're going to have new populations accepted by existing populations, then the infrastructure needs to expand at the same pace and ideally in advance of the growth in the population. We've seen a number of other very good speeches, and I commend the speech from the Honourable Member for Harpenden and Berkhamsted. I'm just going to highlight the two Conservative contributions. So first of all, the Honourable Member for Reigate, she makes a very important point that if you have increased population, it's not just the roads that suffer and need to be expanded, but it's the railway infrastructure as well. In her case, it's an extended station at Reigate. And also, her constituency isn't just suffering from population growth, but it's also travel growth with the nearby expansion of Gatwick Airport. That's a double whammy, Sir Desmond. And the Honourable Member for Mid-Leicestershire made a number of actually very good points. The cumulative impacts of multiple developments on local transport infrastructure, each one is identified and dealt with in isolation. And the argument goes that the road can stand another 500 units, it can stand another 1,200. Well, that might be the case, but when you have 20 such applications, cumulatively, the infrastructure creaks. And he made another very good point, which I have personal experience of, which is local authorities, where he has a constituency with multiple local authorities in it, one local authority making a planning decision that adversely affects residents in the next door authority. In my case, the Liberal Democrat North Norfolk District Council is planning a large settlement, increased settlement to North Walsham, totally ignoring the huge impact in traffic going through nearby Coltershall, where everyone is funneled over a single bridge over the river. And there's an ongoing fight where one district council is ignoring the needs of another one. Surely that we should be able to do better than that. But we've seen the government take steps to alter the housing targets as well, moving targets around the country. These have not always been accompanied by consideration of the impact on local transport. And to take one prominent example, of course, is the county of Dorset, which is having a very significantly increased housing target, top down, as the Honourable Lady said. And yet, one of the first acts of the Labour government on coming into power was to axe the improvements to the A303. And this is the road that links Dorset to London and the South East. We've currently got an 8-mile journey that should take only 10 minutes, regularly taking over an hour. And it's also the vital connection between the South East and the South West, areas where the government targets will result in significant increase in development, where we're going to get more people, more cars, more congestion. And when we consider this example, it demonstrates that disconnect where local areas need, what local areas need when it comes to transport and what the government is willing to deliver. And even when plans have been developed, Desmond, and funding has been secured for key transport schemes, they often become hampered and sometimes even cancelled due to, in my view, unreasonable and burdensome over-regulation. And I only have to look at my own constituency and look at the scheme for the Norwich Western Link. Now, this was the delivery of a scheme that has been of vital importance to the residents of Norfolk and the local economy. Traffic congestion, delays, queuing on small rural roads and through communities in my constituency has long been blighting the area to the west of Norwich. Detailed plans were drawn up for a new 3.9-mile dual carriageway, the last section needed to complete the orbital dual carriageway route around the city of Norwich. The plans were developed with local consultation over 7 years, £230 million funding achieved by myself, a high-value scheme classified by the DFT criteria. And in reliance on this planned road, many thousands of new houses have been allocated to land northeast of Norwich. Natural England was consulted right throughout that 7-year period. In fact, they were very much part of the team. And then 1 week before the planning application was made, the final application was made, and without any notice to the planning team, Natural England changed its approach to a nearby colony of bats and withdrew support, not just for that current scheme, but for any mitigation approach. £50 million of development costs. Local residents and businesses right across Norfolk let down, not consulted, their views not taken into consideration. And despite the Prime Minister talking a good game when it came to organisations unreasonably blocking crucial infrastructure schemes for similar reasons, per the Bat Tunnel, the government did not step in to help. So I am interested to hear from the Minister how the government's planning to stop unelected quangos effectively vetoing democratic decisions. Now, that road may have hit the buffers, at least for the time being, but the housing allocations associated with it, they all remain. You can see those in Taverham, it's a very live issue in my constituency at the moment, and elsewhere. This kind of issue is exactly what residents really, really hate. It's where the process has taken over from the reality on the ground, and that you get the cart before the horse, and then it's going in one direction, and it cannot be stopped. There is no review. And the anger that I suspect, all experience on the doorsteps when residents feel like they're being ignored is very, very real. In November last year, the government published a rapid evidence report on the impacts of integrated land use and transport planning. It summarised evidence on how combining land use and transport planning affects travel. One of its first suggestions, Sir Desmond, for policymakers making land use and transport decisions, and the rapid evidence assessment was this. It was developing awareness of potential unintended consequences via short scoping studies ahead of major investments. It highlighted that this could enable mitigating action to be taken where appropriate. Now, anyone who examines the record of this government over the last 18 months realises that it has an exceptional talent for not considering the consequences of its actions. So perhaps the Minister would like to feed that suggestion into the wider government. But let's also look at planning and development in areas with much better local transport provision than many of us currently enjoy. You'd think that areas with more developed transport networks would be able to encourage significant planning and development without some of the issues that we've been debating between us today. Utilising areas such as brownfield sites close to existing locations should be an important way to help planning with some of the challenges that are posed in rural areas like Norfolk and elsewhere. However, in London, which has the best transport network by far in the country, and significantly subsidised transport services with buses, we have seen an absolute failure by the London Mayor to deliver housing. Just look at last year. I mean, this is really shocking, what's happened. In London last year, just 5,891 housing starts happened. That is 94% below target. A 75% year-on-year decline, the steepest drop in the country, the lowest tally since records began almost 40 years ago, and the lowest figure for any major city in the developed world this century. What a record. I will.
I thank the Shadow Minister for that speech. So just on the point about London, I think it's really important to flag that by effectively reducing the houses they're building in London, people in London are pushed out into constituencies like mine. So the government says we're building more houses so that children and grandchildren can stay close to families, but what just happens is those in London move into the constituency. So would he agree with me that that's not really achieving the aims that he set?
She's absolutely right. The failure of the London Mayor is putting pressure on her constituency and many other communities in the wider orbit of London. So overall, and to conclude, you'll be pleased to hear, Sir Desmond, I understand the government will say that it's trying to take action to integrate these elements and to ensure that planning development does not negatively impact local transport. But in trying to deliver its targets on development, the government should stop and consider what steps it can take to make it easier to build infrastructure and to support planning that actually delivers local infrastructure improvements before new populations arise.
Minister.
Thank you very much, and a pleasure to see you in the chair as always, Sir Desmond. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for Hobbiton and Berkhamsted for securing this debate today and for all the comments from Honourable Members in their contributions today. I'm grateful for the opportunity to discuss how planning developments impact on local transport, a subject of great importance and a priority in the context of our housing ambitions. There's an awful lot being said today, and members will forgive me if I have an aversion to taking many interventions. I think it's important I'm able to respond to many of the comments made today. Aligning housing and transport is essential for delivering homes that are connected, sustainable and provide genuine choices for people. To that end, we have prioritised making changes to the planning system in support of growth and placemaking. This includes providing the tools that local planning authorities need to ensure developments are supported by the right transport infrastructure for the local context. The Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government are currently consulting on revisions to the National Planning Policy Framework, and if progressed, these revisions will deliver better located development with more sustainable travel choices supported by robust guidance. We've already made changes through the Planning Infrastructure Act to streamline the planning process for nationally significant infrastructure projects, which will speed up the pace of decision-making on critical projects. And the Act also places a duty on combined authorities, combined county authorities, upper-tier county councils and unitary authorities to prepare spatial development strategies, an important opportunity to set the context for local plans, which will have to be in general conformity with the strategy once it has been adopted. Taken together, these changes will make a real difference to the people we all serve. delivering more housing, greater transport choices and better designed, healthier places. The government believes that an integrated, affordable and sustainable transport network is vital to unlocking homes with good access to jobs, education and public services. This includes improving bus services, boosting passenger numbers and giving local leaders greater control. To support this, my department launched the Connectivity Tool last year. It brings together transport and land use data to show how well locations are connected to jobs and key services, helping communities to identify infrastructure gaps and plan development sustainably. The tool has already been used across the country to ensure new housing aligns with existing and planned infrastructure. I believe the tool will empower local government, developers and planners to make better decisions about where development should happen and plan for the infrastructure needed to support it. In parallel, the Railways Bill will establish Great British Railways as a directing mind. One of its objectives is to facilitate home building and placemaking. Great British Railways will be an outward-facing and work in partnership with Merrill strategic authorities, enabling a greater focus on local priorities such as housing and regeneration. We've already taken action. Platform 4, a company launched in November 2025, and is already working to develop disused brownfield land, rail land, with an ambition to deliver 40,000 homes over the coming decade. This will support our housing, regeneration and growth ambitions by creating new places to live, work, learn and play, putting the railway at the heart of our neighbourhoods. The honourable member also mentioned Green Belt policy and its implications for villages such as Redbourne. And as I understand it, the proposed changes to the definition of grey belt seeks to better enable the identification of grey belt land when ensuring protection of the green belt. Alongside this, the introduction of the spatial development strategies will identify broad locations for housing growth across larger geographies than the district level, while at the same time coordinating the provision of strategic infrastructure and improving the environment and climate resilience. This will help to better distribute and identify the appropriate scale of developments within places like Hertfordshire. In reference to major developments in the surrounding areas, all planning decisions are taken on a case-by-case basis, based on national and local planning policies and other material considerations. On Universal Studios, the government approved the special development order for the site in December 2025, noting the project's national significance. As part of this, there are extensive transport works to be delivered to support the surrounding network, including expanding Wixham's railway station to enable public transport journeys to the site. On Luton Airport, given the ongoing legal proceedings, there's not much that I can say. However, the Secretary of State for Transport's decision letter on the case sets out her reasoning for that consent. Regarding cumulative impacts of developments, this government is operationalising a new approach to transport planning through changes to the National Planning Policy Framework by taking a vision-led approach to transport planning that sets clear outcomes from the outset of the planning process. We can deliver well-connected communities which are served by sustainable transport and co-located with key services, breaking that cycle which has been left people with a lack of transport choice and ever more congested road networks. And I believe this will make it easier for new developments to deliver the transport options that people need and want, and help decision makers better manage the cumulative impacts of significant developments affecting places like Redbourne. In relation to the specific concerns regarding congestion, National Highways is a statutory consultee on planning applications and will assess the impact of new developments on the strategic road network. National Highways expects developers to explore all options to reduce a resilience on the strategic road network for local journeys. When this does occur, National Highways are empowered to recommend refusal of planning applications that would cause substantial impacts on the road network, including issuing holding responses to enable more evidence to be provided or provide conditions for mitigating the impact of development. Just to pick on a few other points that people raise, on the local plan in St Albans, I understand that this local plan is currently being replaced. It is one of the oldest and most out-of-date plans. I recognise that it has been inherited, but it does date back to 1994. 1994. And it's expected that new plan will be adopted in March this year. The government's proposed national policy framework outlines all the development proposals should be capable of proceeding without having a severe adverse impact on transport networks in terms of capacity congestion, including that cumulative impact. And local decision makers should consider the cumulative impacts of transport when deciding their planning applications. On rail, all rail operators are required to plan services based on demand and value for money. Great British Railways, as I mentioned, will have a significant role in that. Governor Thameslink Railway have shared demand modelling with the department, which does include projections for planned development along the Thameslink network. The department requires all operators to plan future timetables that reflect expected demand and provide value for money for the taxpayer. And we will continue to work with Governor Thameslink Railway as they develop their proposals for development along that route. On bus funding, I'm sure all members will welcome the £3 billion of funding, multi-year funding, that is going to support bus services across the country. In Hertfordshire, County Council will be allocated £34.1 million under the local authority bus grant from 26-27 to 28-29, and that's in addition to the £12.2 million already allocated. And that includes, for the first time, a rurality aspect to the formula to make sure that rural areas receive their fair share. Just moving on to the comments from my humble friend, the opposition spokesman. I find it hard to accept some of his comments, really, there. We have inherited, I think, a housing crisis caused by the Conservatives, which seen house building plummet. The government will not shy away from taking the decisive action needed to fix that for good. This government is turning the tide on the Tories' housing crisis, which has seen 1.3 million families stuck on housing waiting lists and over 165,000 children growing up in temporary accommodation. On affordable housing, our new £39 billion social and affordable housing programme will build around 300,000 new homes over 10 years, including at least 60% for social rent, around 180,000 homes. And this is six times the number of social and affordable homes built in the last decade. Chair, today's debate has demonstrated the importance of integrating transport and housing to see them not as separate systems but as one. I trust that the honourable member can see how, taken together, these reforms represent meaningful re-gearing of the transport and spatial planning systems to fix the housing crisis whilst delivering the transport that our communities need. Thank you.
Point of order.
Thank you. I just wanted to draw members' explicit attention to my register of interest as a serving county councillor. Thank you.
Thank you. Victoria Collins to sum up.
Thank you very much, Sir Desmond, and thank you to all the colleagues who have spoken today. Let me just reiterate, the local people of Harpenden, Berkhamsted, Tring, Redbourne, Sandridge, all of our local villages, they're not NIMBYs, and they understand the need for housing and that genuinely affordable housing. But what is clear is that they cannot understand, and what this debate has shown is many colleagues, and I think their local populations have the same frustrations, is a planning system that hands power to developers and takes it away from communities. And what the Minister talked about is it's a nice display of the fact that there are supposedly powers for local councils, but the reality, as I outlined, in many ways undermines councils and those powers and means that the communities are left actually with a developer-led system still. And that means that doubling housing targets, that doubling infrastructure, they also can't understand a system that leaves villages like Redbourne facing 70% growth through that grey belt. And let me just clarify, because the Minister mentioned about grey belt, the problem is it does not protect villages. It protects towns, but it's not protecting villages. And that is a problem with the MPPF and something that I'll be putting forward in the consultation. But it also expects local people to sacrifice precious landscapes for homes their own children still can't afford. Trains cancelled daily, buses that stop at 2 p.m, roads built for horse-drawn carts are now gridlocked. And that is the reality of planning without infrastructure. And I welcome that there are reviews going on right now with the MPPF. But I would say, what about villages like Redbourne and the villages now who are under the current planning system, still outlined by Labour? What will happen if actually it turns out that they have been dealt a really bad card, and will they be able to fit some of that planning infrastructure? Because actually it really is an issue for our local communities. I'd also push gently on the Thames Thameslink question, it is that there are some welcome proposals there, but it is going to be a massive issue. That Thameslink, for so many communities all along that Bedford-Brighton link, it really has to relook at that infrastructure, the core of the Thameslink, whether it's at Croydon, there is a real issue there. But so I asked the Minister to take back one message to his teams. Communities like mine do not want to choose between housing and infrastructure. They need both, planned together from the start. That infrastructure, community-led development, as I say, is the least that our communities deserve. Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered the impact of planning developments on local transport. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.